Just imagine that a colony who built their entire city for their good life suddenly vanish.
What if an entire civilization didn't disappear naturally, but was systematically erased from existence? Across ancient burial sites in Mesoamerica, scientists have been extracting DNA from bones that are thousands of years old. At first, the goal was simple: map ancestry, trace migration, understand how great empires rose and fell. But what they found didn't fit any known pattern of human history. Every single male bloodline from the civilizations that came before the Aztecs, the Olmec civilization, the Maya civilization, the Toltec civilization, the builders of Teotihuacan, completely erased from the genetic record, not reduced, not diluted, gone. Their Y chromosomes wiped as if they never existed. But then came the detail no one was prepared for. The women survived. The maternal bloodlines continued, almost untouched. The mothers lived on. But the fathers, the sons, the rulers, the warriors, vanished from the genetic timeline. Something happened here. Something deliberate. Something violent enough to remove entire male lineages, while leaving the rest of society intact. And when researchers traced who filled that sudden genetic void, the answer pointed directly toward the rise of the Aztec civilization, and a theory once dismissed as impossible, a theory that one man had been warning about for years: Graham Hancock. Before we reveal what scientists uncovered in those ancient bones, hit like and subscribe, because what you're about to hear is something they don't want you to question. Let's start at the beginning. The signal that shouldn't exist. In 2015, Dr. Pontus Skoglund at Harvard was running what should have been routine genetic analysis on ancient Amazonian remains, standard sequencing, the kind of methodical work that fills academic journals without making headlines. Then the algorithm returned something that made no sense: genetic markers from Aboriginal Australians, from the opposite side of the planet. Skoglund closed the program and reopened it. Same result. He called a colleague over and ran it a third time. Still there. According to every textbook, every museum exhibit, every documentary ever made on the subject, humans entered the Americas roughly 15,000 years ago through a single land bridge from Siberia. One migration, one source population. Clean, simple, case closed. But this Australasian signal predated that Siberian migration. It pointed to a crossing of the Pacific Ocean, something that mainstream science had always said was impossible. And here's where it gets strange. The signal wasn't spread evenly across the Americas the way a normal migration would be. It was clustered, almost entirely concentrated in the Amazon basin, nearly absent everywhere else. That kind of pattern doesn't come from an ancient migration. It comes from a population that was once widespread and then systematically wiped out, with only the most remote, isolated groups surviving deep enough in the jungle that the waves of replacement never fully reach them. That word, replacement, turns out to be the key to understanding everything that came after. The erased fathers now. Here's where the DNA evidence gets truly disturbing. When Dr. Maria Avila Arcos at Mexico's National Autonomous University analyzed Y chromosome data from ancient Mesoamerican remains, she ran the results once, then again, then a third time, each time hoping she'd find the contamination, the error, the explanation. Each time, the data didn't change. The male lineages of the Olmec, the builders of Teotihuacan, the early Maya, the Toltec, all of them had vanished from the genetic record, not gradually faded over centuries through natural drift. Gone, every single Y chromosome that should have passed from father to son for hundreds of generations had simply stopped, terminated, like bloodlines cut with a surgical knife. and yet the female lineages were intact. Maternal DNA crossed every collapse, every catastrophe, every civilization-ending event without a break. Women were absorbed into new populations, married into new communities, and carried their genetic heritage forward through daughters and granddaughters. Generation after generation, the mothers endured. The fathers did not. Now, what makes this truly alarming is the shape of these breaks in the data. Normal population mixing is gradual. Two groups meet, intermarry, and over 10 or 20 generations, their genetics slowly blend. The curve is smooth, the shift is quiet. This was not quiet. The breaks were sudden, sharp, and they coincided exactly with moments of civilizational collapse. One generation, a paternal lineage with deep roots. The next generation, completely different men, strangers, as if the original fathers had never existed. That pattern has a name. It's called catastrophic replacement. And it didn't happen once. It happened over and over again at every major Mesoamerican site researchers examined. Teotihuacan, the city that was unmade. To understand the scale of what this means, you need to understand what Teotihuacan was. At its peak, around 450 AD, this city held over 125,000 people. It rivaled Rome in both population and ambition. Its Pyramid of the Sun rises more than 200 feet above the valley floor. Its influence stretched across all of Mesoamerica. Trade goods stamped with its symbols found hundreds of kilometers away, foreign rulers claiming its authority to legitimize their own thrones. This wasn't just a city. It was the center of the known world. When the Aztecs arrived centuries later and found its ruins, they were so overwhelmed they believed only gods could have built it. They called it the place where men became gods. Around 550 AD, Teotihuacan didn't just decline. It was destroyed with a ferocity that still unsettles archaeologists today. Temples burned hot enough to crack stone, blood soaked so deeply into plaza floors that chemical traces remain 15 centuries later. Monuments weren't simply toppled, they were defaced with a fury that suggests not military conquest, but personal, intimate hatred. And within a single generation, different men were walking those streets. Different Y chromosomes, different bloodlines, complete replacement. Dr. Andres Moreno Estrada was presenting these findings at a genetics conference when he paused mid-sentence, staring at his own slide. 200 researchers sat in silence. He described the data as watching a crime committed in genetic slow motion. Except when you zoomed in on individual sites, it wasn't slow at all. It was instantaneous, one generation to the next. Erasure. The same pattern appeared everywhere researchers looked. Sharp Y chromosome breaks at the classic Maya collapse. Toltec paternal signatures vanishing abruptly after their empire fell. Each civilization separated by centuries, experiencing the same fate. War explains some of it. Ancient armies killed men and took women. Over time, this erases Y chromosomes while maternal DNA survives. Conquerors become fathers. The conquered become genetic ghosts. But what happened across Mesoamerica was not ordinary warfare between neighboring cities. This was a continental cycle, repeating with clockwork regularity across millennia. Each collapse creating a genetic vacuum, each vacuum filling with newcomers who would, in turn, be erased themselves. Exactly the cycle Hancock had described. The Aztecs, fresh blood in a graveyard. Which brings us to the people who stepped into the final vacuum. The Aztecs, or Mexica, arrived in central Mexico after nearly 2 centuries of wandering. According to their own histories, they were nomads, mercenaries, barbarians. Nobody wanted them. They were expelled from territory after territory, considered outsiders wherever they went. They claimed to be awaiting a divine sign, an eagle on a cactus devouring a snake, before they could settle. They found it on a swampy island in Lake Texcoco in 1325 and founded Tenochtitlan. Some researchers now ask a quiet but uncomfortable question. Was 2 centuries of wandering really aimless? Or were the Mexica deliberately or instinctively waiting for exactly the right moment? Because when they arrived, they weren't walking into competition. They were walking into a genetic graveyard. The region had been destabilized by centuries of violence. Male lineages of every prior civilization had been shattered and overwritten multiple times. Surviving populations were fragmented, hollowed out, their power structures long dismantled. Into that fractured landscape came the Aztecs with something no one else had anymore: intact Y chromosomes. Their male lines had never been broken by conquest. They arrived as a coherent genetic unit, fresh bloodlines in a land where every other paternal lineage had been cut. And they moved fast. Within 2 centuries, they built one of the largest cities on Earth. Tenochtitlan was bigger than London or Paris at the time. Causeways crossed the lake. Aqueducts carried fresh water for miles. Floating gardens called chinampas fed hundreds of thousands. When Spanish conquistadors first saw it rising from the water in 1519, soldier Bernal Diaz del Castillo wrote that men asked each other whether what they were seeing was real or a dream. As the Aztecs expanded, their Y chromosomes spread across central Mexico like wildfire. They married women from every conquered population, merging their intact paternal lineages with the surviving maternal DNA of civilizations long since destroyed. Within just a few generations, Aztec paternal ancestry became dominant across their entire growing empire. Dr. Alexander Ioannidis at Stanford was reviewing the data from city-states that fell under Aztec control when he stopped scrolling and called his team into the room. The Y chromosome shifts following Aztec conquest were unlike anything he'd seen at this scale in any population on Earth. A complete genetic overhaul, sometimes occurring within a single generation. Local gene pools reorganized overnight. And they had a tool beyond military force: Nahuatl, their language. When the Spanish arrived, they were shocked at how far it had spread. Through trade routes, markets, administrative networks, far beyond the reach of any Aztec army. Language travels with people. And wherever Nahuatl went, Aztec genes followed. DNA from regions connected by those trade routes shows genetic mixing entirely consistent with long-distance movement and intermarriage. The Aztecs weren't just conquering territory, they were building an empire of blood, extending their paternal ancestry across a continent whose original fathers had already been erased by someone else. The question nobody is asking. Now here is where the story goes, somewhere even Hancock didn't anticipate. The Australasian signal Dr. Skoglund found in 2015 is far older than any Mesoamerican civilization. It represents contact or migration at the very beginning of human presence in the Americas, possibly 15,000 years ago or more. That means the pattern of genetic replacement wasn't born from organized warfare or complex empires. It was already ancient before a single city was built, before the Maya plotted their first star chart, before Teotihuacan's first stone was laid. For 15,000 years, populations across the Americas had been rewritten. The genetic slate wiped clean, over and over, long before anyone had a word for what was happening. Dr. David Reich at Harvard was reviewing the complete data set. Every ancient genome, every Y chromosome break, every line of maternal continuity. when he went quiet in the middle of a lab meeting. When he finally spoke, he said they were only beginning to understand the true violence embedded in human genetic history. Violence that left its signature in every sample. Violence that mainstream archaeology had refused to see until the DNA made it impossible to ignore. The Spanish interrupted the Aztecs in 1519. Disease, weapons, and colonization dismantled their empire before their genetic conquest could complete. But the DNA survived. Aztec Y chromosomes are still dominant across Mexico and Central America 500 years later. The Spanish burned their books, destroyed their temples, and outlawed their religion. They could not erase the blood. So here is the final question, the one nobody is asking yet. If this cycle of erasing fathers and replacing bloodlines has been running for 15,000 years, and the Aztecs were just the latest iteration, then who started it? What population arrived first and set the entire chain in motion? Because that original wave predates every civilization we have a name for. We have no texts from them, no oral histories that reach back far enough, no monuments, no art. Only the faintest ghost of a genetic signal buried in isolated Amazonian communities, slowly being decoded by machines that didn't exist a decade ago. The Aztecs replaced erased fathers, but someone erased those fathers first, and someone erased the ones before them. And before them, 15,000 years of men disappearing, women surviving, new bloodlines overwriting the old. A cycle so ancient, it predates human memory itself. Graham Hancock spent decades arguing that the past is far more violent and strange than the textbooks admit. That civilizations were catastrophically erased and replaced while mainstream science looked the other way. They called him a fraud. The DNA says otherwise, and we are only just beginning to read what's written in the bones.